this brings us nicely, I guess, if you're talking about systemic problems, then I guess it's now, and system issues, as it were, is a nice way then to talk more about it and to introduce the speakers in the next session, session 3, the higher education system issues. There are 3 speakers here. I think Dr. Andrew Aeria will then take over from me and take charge over the session. Dr. Andrew Aeria was formerly Associate Professor in the Department of Politics and International Relations at the Faculty of Social Sciences in UNIMAS, University of Malaysia, in Sarawak. During his university career, Andrew taught courses on social history, political science, democracy and social movements, anthropology, the environment and political economy. He's always been curious about and remains interested in issues related to social history to social history, democracy and civil society, development and poverty and inequality. He retired from UNIMAS in August 2017 and served as a member of the Ministry of Education's Permanent Selection Committee for Public University Vice Chancellors. Dr. Mazli mentioned that earlier. Jawatan Kuasa Tetap Pemilihan Naib Chancellor Universiti Awam from 2018 to 2020, as well as a member of the Board of Directors of UNIMAS from 2019 to 2020. The other speakers, the next speaker would be Lieutenant Colonel retired Ahmad Ghazali Abu Hassan, who was a military man and later an academic who taught international law and defense studies in 2 Malaysian public universities. He has held the appointment of head of department, deputy dean, and dean of faculty. And also in this committee is a popular columnist, say Dr. Sharifah Munirah Alatas, who has a doctorate from Columbia University. Her specialties are geopolitics, strategic thought, and alternative approaches to international relations theory. Her interests lie in decolonizing knowledge and responses to Eurocentrism in knowledge production. Currently an academic at UKM, her previous appointments include Director of Research and Publications, Institute of Diplomacy and Foreign Relations, IDFR, and political analyst at the Institute of Strategic International Studies, ISIS. She's a regular columnist with Free Malaysia Today and is an active member of G25 Group of Eminent Malaysians and the Academic Movement of Malaysia, which is GERA. She's currently completing her book, Reflections on Social Political Transformation in Post-GE14 Malaysia. Without further ado, I'll pass this on to Andrew, I think, who will lead the discussion, which I'm sure will be pretty heated the next session. Andrew, are you ready?
Okay, thank you, Zahrom, and good morning, everybody. Let me just begin by thanking GERAK for inviting all of us for this session, and I'll just go straight to Dr. Munirah, who will begin her presentation now. Munirah, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for that introduction. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss systemic issues. Now, contrary to what has been spoken about this morning so far, I will be addressing not anything specific about the higher education institutions or the universities per se, but a general attitude towards learning and education in the country. So this is my take on systemic, okay, these systemic issues. All right, what do we mean by systemic issues? What does it mean in the context of education? Systemic or systems perspective assumes society is an organism. It assumes a degree of integration among its components. So we have businesses in a society, families, CSOs, local government, educational institutions, meaning universities as well, medical services, how these integrate with each other. Now, when there is a breakdown in integration, we have a systemic crisis, as what we are seeing over the last several years. In fact, we have a systemic crisis. The crisis spreads throughout, affecting all aspects of society. In the context of Malaysia's higher education, we address two phenomena. At least I would like to address two phenomena. The first one is how we conceptualize our philosophy of education. The ministry has its own idea of what a philosophy of education is. The second issue that we need to address is how this concept of philosophy has deviated from our national aspirations, which is embodied in the RUKUN NEGARA. And this is basically the subject of my presentation, which is to bring in this idea that we had 50 years ago, or rather a philosophy that we had 50 years ago, embodied in our RUKUN NEGARA. First of all, what is a philosophy of education? Plato had defined education as a means to achieve justice, and attaining justice means achieving excellence. All our universities, we have a mission statement, and in that mission statement, we add on the word excellence. So it is assumed that each university has its philosophy of education, which is to attain excellence. But whether that is equated with justice as what Plato has implied is another question. Now, what about the Islamic philosophical worldview? Of course, this is not in detail, but the gist of it is to acquire knowledge for living within a social and cultural system, to understand human and non-human life forms, to be conscious of our universe, to ensure the spiritual, moral, psychological, and intellectual development of personality, which goes back to what Mr. Menon was talking about, and my question to him about the personality of the lecturers that we have today. The second last point, to develop civic consciousness, social solidarity, justice, and excellence. And finally, to integrate this personality that we are supposed to be developing within a cosmic order. So this is basically an attitude or a philosophy, an ideology, or rather a philosophy of education. Now, what I have here is a screenshot. It's a screenshot of the handwritten notes of my father, Syed Hussein Alatas, written in 1970. It's actually notes that he jotted down as a prelude to a speech he was about to give that same year, sometime in November. 1970 November means it is a few months, 2 months after the RUKUN NEGARA was proclaimed. Now, these 15 points are actually incorporated. Some of them have been incorporated into the RUKUN NEGARA. But I would like to draw your attention to just 3 of them. Okay, and incidentally, I would like to mention an article which was published a few months ago by my younger sister, Sharifah Mastura, in which she had published this particular set of notes, my father's notes. In it, she was analyzing, or rather discussing, in her article, which was titled Syed Hussein Alatas' Contributions to the RUKUN NEGARA. Now, it's very important that we highlight some of these points because what we see at the back of our exercise books are 5 statements from the RUKUN NEGARA that everyone recites rather robotically. We say it every day, we see it every day. But the background to those 5 statements is what is missing in the basic education philosophy of our country. And that's why I need to talk about this. Also, I would like to add that my siblings and I, my younger sister and my older brother, Said Farid, we often mention our father's works, not because we believe in nepotism or cronyism, but because my father's thoughts and his writings have a direct, or rather, yes, are directly significant to the social and political problems our country has been facing for decades. And he's an academic. My late father, as an academic, had contributed to the development, the early development of this country. But as since the country has not benefited much for many other reasons, which we cannot go into right now. But essentially, let us focus on the Rukun Negara. 50 years have gone by, and just a few months ago at Merdeka, we read many reports in the media about nostalgia towards the Rukun Negara. But of course, now it's December and nobody talks about it again. So let me be the troublemaker and bring it up again, because this is a serious issue. Now, I mentioned 3 points in that list of 15 points that were jotted down. The first being, no citizen should question the loyalty of another citizen on the ground that he belonged to a particular community. This is very important because it is included in the Rukun Negara. But at the same time, we hear in society today, in the media, in social media, in ceramah that academics deliver papers in, even in the public and politicians, we talk about how certain communities in the country don't belong in the country. They don't deserve to be in the country, despite them being citizens. So this is a serious issue. Now, the second one, to have a high standard of public and individual morality. Public and individual morality. We know very well that many of our decision makers, our lawmakers, lack this public and individual morality. Yet it is in the Rukun Negara that we keep praising every time Merdeka comes around. The third point, to reject psychological feudalism, corruption, exploitation, and all forms of oppression. So these 3 points embody the very system that we can see before our eyes falling apart. It should be used as a way to reconstruct our society, the people who live in our society. Do not go back to these key principles. We have failed to see that the Rukun Negara itself is the medication needed to repair our country. Now, what is the synergy, you may ask, between the Rukun Negara and our education philosophy? The conceptualization or writing of any guiding principle, which is what the Rukun Negara is, brings together minds, the best minds. They represent diverse views and concerns of all segments of society. Now, when the Rukun Negara was drafted, the drafting process, there were about 70 odd people involved in it. They were all multiracial, multi-religious, from across the political spectrum. As far as Malaysia's education system is concerned, it has been marred by difficulties for decades. We need to revisit that process of debate. Now, as you can see from the slide, during that drafting process, my father did note down in his notes that it was drafted in the spirit of a mariner's chart in a troubled sea. And as far as Malaysia's education system goes, it is in a troubled sea. So why shouldn't we revisit the 1970s with that effort of desperation to repair and to get through this troubled ocean that we are in? Yes, it sounds very figurative, but the point is we have a history, we've been through it, and just because education does not specifically relate to racial relations, nevertheless, we should see it as a crisis equivalent to what happened in 1969. So this brings me to the next point. If we can make the connection between the situation in the 1970 and onwards with the current situation, we are aware of a consciousness of there being a systemic crisis. It is obvious that our education philosophy would be more complete if we incorporated the 3 clauses that I referred to earlier of the RUKUN NEGARA. As a result, our education crisis keeps increasing because we have ignored these basic problems, or rather these basic clauses. Part of the first sentence of our national education philosophy reads, developing the potential of individuals in a holistic and integrated manner. However, because our approach has not been holistic, we keep repeating the same flaws. We have failed to connect the dots between the physical, the philosophical, and the spiritual dimensions affecting the totality of life in Malaysia. For example, I will just read off the slide, okay? But the bulk of issues that will follow while I read will show you the extent to which we have been misdirected, or we are being misdirecting ourselves. We fail to include narratives of patriotism, ethno-nationalism, corruption, ethical standards of our leaders, the political maturity of our citizens, our feudal past, our colonial past, globalization, hegemony of big powers in our region, the obsession with the business of education, academic dependency, intellectual imperialism, etc., etc. When we address our educational aspirations, we cannot compartmentalize issues. We must approach a crisis from all angles, and we have not done that. There's no such thing as division of labor when it comes to addressing a systemic crisis. In conclusion, now this is the most important, it's one of the most important points that I should make, which is what is the role of our scholars, the senior scholars like me, I suppose, who are on our way out. Scholars who are conscious of the current crisis in higher education must selflessly mentor the younger generation of educators. It doesn't help when politicians and civil society pay lip service to rhetoric like, we need to phase out the old leadership and nurture the young talent. I've been hearing this for a few years now. We need young talent, we need young MPs. It won't work because we don't seem to have that culture of nurturing. The mentor-mentee system we currently have in our universities is an excellent initiative, but it is not taken seriously. Like many rules and regulations, policies we have are never taken seriously. Endemic in our universities is a regressive culture of envy, jealousy, and insecurity among academics themselves. Our scholars, and as Menon referred to, so-called intellectuals, need to develop more confidence so we can rejuvenate the academic culture of debate, discussions, nurturing, fellowship, everything that used to exist on campus in the 60s and the 70s. In the process, we must desire to mold young budding scholars. If we are constantly envious or jealous of our peers, we would not want to mold those coming up after us. And we should have this attitude in the same vein that the drafters of the RUKUN NEGARA were sincere about healing the nation. Because our role now is we have a role to heal the nation. I think that is the end. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Munirah, for that very, concise elaboration of the philosophical, some would even say spiritual underpinnings of what it means to be an intellectual and to be a real academic in a university. I'd like now to talk about, I'll go second and then Ghazali will go third. So I'd like to share my screen now. All right. So I would like to talk about the higher education system, again, system issues. And my question that I would like to ask ourselves in this presentation is, are we digging ourselves deeper into a hole? The question which was touched upon by Munirah just now was the whole question of excellence, academic excellence. And core to the higher education system in Malaysia is the whole question of achieving excellence. And if you go to the ministry in Precinct 5 in Putrajaya, you will see this, lovely poster that talks about soaring upwards, education reform, the Malaysian experience. And you have in 2015, the Malaysian education blueprint, higher education. It's 240 pages, if I'm not wrong. It's a thick document, but it's very, very valuable document and talks about very important things. And in the introduction, the then Minister of Education and now presently Prime Minister, Tan Sri Muhyiddin, talked about the fact that the government is committed to transforming the education system. And he also said in his little introduction that the blueprint in itself is insufficient. And mind you, many people, just now I think Dr. Changda talked about the fact that, or even Menon, that the National Council on Higher Education, not many people know about it. Few people also know about the Malaysian education blueprint in higher education circles. Yet it's there, it's very valuable, but the blueprint in itself is insufficient. What matters most is implementation. And I would like to talk in the next few slides, the fact that what is stopping implementation are really some serious challenges. And I will only take up 3 points. The whole question of academic scholarship, the process of actually, while we have all these wonderful documents, there is a process of dismantling of academic autonomy and the disregard of rules that has been happening over the past 10, 20 years. I think Francis Lowe mentioned it just now in the first session. And the third point, the third challenge I want to talk about is, what are we educating our young graduates for? What is it for? And I want to talk about the whole question of funding and student debt. So, and I will end with some suggestions going forward. So on the first issue of academic scholarship, I think that presently there exists a serious misunderstanding and non-appreciation of what academic scholarship means in higher education. And I'm referring to a lot of university academics, people in the Ministry of Higher Education also. I'd like to say that academic scholarship demands respect for diversity and difference. Again, a few points that Munirah brought up just now. but also it requires a culture of reading broadly and in depth. The fact that many of us in academia don't even know about the blueprint, don't even know about the National Council of Higher Education, these don't even know the rules, and I will talk about that later. There are lots of secrets in higher education. Many do not read broadly nor in depth. Many do not engage in discussion and debate, and you can see this happening even in the ministry today. The moment there's a new minister, new set of senior officials, they only talk among themselves. We only talk among ourselves also. A culture of collaboration, of freely sharing information, as opposed to keeping all information, keeping research for themselves. This culture of collaboration is lacking. A culture of thoughtful inquiry, intellectual exploration, to push boundaries. This is also very, rare in our universities. A culture of mentoring younger students and younger scholars, as Munirah mentioned, that's lacking. An appreciation of academic freedom and autonomy. This is severely lacking today. The courage to speak truth to power, to question authority, not only political authority, but intellectual authority, economic authority, social authorities in search of truth. This is an arena where people are afraid to go to. A desire to serve and speak for the last, the least, and the lost. Few academics today get involved in the marginalized, those left behind by development, those who are on the margins. Many prefer to go after the money. And of course, integrity, manners, ethics, and principles. I think Munirah has talked about this. So consequently, without understanding scholarship, I think many academics, and with no disrespect to school teachers, whom I admire greatly, many of our academics have been reduced to just teaching textbook, following the syllabus as set by ministry agencies. Situation is particularly dire among top administrators, and it impacts autonomy. And this is what I mean. Because we don't understand scholarship, many university lecturers, because we are afraid to speak truth to power, we don't adhere to the rules. Many university academics and certainly administrators, they don't even know that statutes exist. Now you have the UUCA, you have the Constitution of Universities, and then you have the statutes. All universities have statutes, and in the statutes, which are the rules, it details the powers and the responsibilities of the Vice-Chancellor, the board, LPU, Lembaga Pengarah University, the Deputy Vice-Chancellors, the deans, the directors, the school boards, the faculties. So everything is existing there. It's detailed, but it's the best kept secret in universities. Many university academics don't know about it, let alone follow. So this has allowed university administrators to act in an authoritarian fashion. There's little consultation in appointment of deans and directors, even though it's stated that the Vice-Chancellor should consult academics in appointment of deans and directors, but they don't. Often they prefer to just talk among themselves and then they appoint who they want. Faculty meetings and senates now are not as important as academic decision-making fora. They become talk shops for top-down information sharing and directive implementation. So they become rubber stamping bodies for the vice-chancellors, and vice-chancellors pick people to become administrators in the universities. They pick people whom they can work with. It's a code word for obedience, loyalties, and competence in implementing directives. Now, why is this important? It's important because administrators set a bit of tone, in fact, a large portion of tone for academic leadership in the universities. You want university lecturers and students to be really scholars, intellectuals, you've got to set the tone. But if you don't set that tone, if you set an authoritarian tone, then what you get are glorified office boys, coffee girls, or what I call tukang pukul in the faculty. Yeah? Deans, directors, deputy vice chancellors, and even vice chancellors who just push academic staff to meet meaningless KPIs, to improve rankings so that they can, look great. And it's a good marketing tool. We've got to bring in money in the universities. Now I want to talk about university boards. What has happened is that this is also a very not often talked about body in universities, often sort of passed over, the LPU, the boards. Because of the lack of understanding and non-appreciation of scholarship and autonomy and academic freedom, you have board members, the appointment of board members that is less than satisfactory. There are merit-based considerations, and if that is listed in this green book, the Board of Governance, this is also another good secret, which many academics don't know about. These considerations exist in principle, but it allows for ambiguity. And because not many people know about these, about the board, not many people talk about the board, more often than not, LPU appointments are not based on merit. And I think this is very clear when, after the change in government, a lot of board members were changed. Appointments were changed. Many of those, and I think also just now, Dr. Mazli alluded to it, many members of who are appointed to university boards, they lack an understanding of what academic scholarship and leadership is. I mean, when you appoint, ketua bahagian of a certain political party to a board as a board member, I mean, I'm sorry, but I fail to see how they can appreciate what academic scholarship and leadership is. And I think many university board members are into the glamour of the position instead of improving scholarship in the university. They're more into what you call rankings instead of the substance of the university. Now, few board members even read the green book, the one on your screen. And there is little succession planning in universities. If any succession planning of grooming deputy vice chancellors, deans who will then one day rise up through the ranks, it's based more on friendships, obedience, and loyalty instead of merit and intellectual scholarship. If you ask too many questions in university, and if you ask the wrong type of question, you then get filtered out of the process of going through the higher education leadership academy, going through the higher education grooming of succession. And what we have then is a situation where autonomy today only stops at the senior administration level, at the board level. Autonomy in terms of academic substance does not translate down to faculty or even individual academic levels. And we have talked about this. Now, this point about student debt and higher education. Now, if you look at the documents of the Ministry of Higher Education, you will find that higher education is, to quote, a vehicle for upward social mobility, overcoming intergenerational poverty, and improving income distribution. We want to be centers of educational excellence, but we also want to make sure that our universities help the younger generation. So we have, and I think Menon and the previous session talked about it, the financing of higher education is currently by block grants and PTPTN loans. So although university education is heavily subsidized, students today are made to take out loans, and large loans to finance their education. And the irony is that many of our university graduates are unemployed and even unemployable. It's stated in documents that graduates lack critical thinking, communication skills, and language competency. So in a sense, in our current form, our higher education is deficient. More and more students are deliberately being put into a system of lifelong debt by a funding model that does not benefit students. So students end up owing a lot of money. The data that I managed to find, in April 2019, 350,000 PTPTN defaulters owed 6.5 billion to the PTPTN Corporation. PTPTN has loans of 56 billion owing to them by they had outstanding loans to 3 million students. And another estimate put outstanding debt to PTPTN at 39 billion as of 2019. And then very recently, just last month, an economist said that PTPTN is unstable. The debtors are too poor to repay, graduate salaries are too low, and graduate unemployment too high. So in a sense, the PTPTN scheme is unsustainable. It's going to be, as time goes on, a real burden on the national coffer. So my question is, we talk about education for academic excellence, we talk about overcoming intergenerational poverty, but what are we running the higher education system for? What are we excellence for? What is excellence for? Is it restructuring society really? Is it achieving technological leaps forward? Are we serving industry? Are we serving society? Or are we actually in reality deepening indebtedness and inequality? So it's a chicken and egg problem as I see. We want talent. Industry says our talent is not good enough. A lot of the talent is trying to get work, trying to improve their economic situation, but they're not able to. We expect industry to grant them higher wages, but industry won't grant higher wages if talent is not improved. So it's a chicken and egg problem. And we talk about excellence, but we also impose huge debt burdens on our students. You know, sometimes I think PTPTN really should be scrapped, but that's in my moments of clarity, I think. So finally, my last slide, I think we need a serious evaluation, and we've had serious evaluations. We have the education blueprint, we've had the committee that Dr. Changda talked about just now with the 6 policy papers. We have the National Council on Higher Education. We have all these evaluations. The question is, what are we doing with implementation? What happens? You know, how do we address an issue where the moment there's a change of administration, political administration at ministerial level and in the ministry, what happens to all the evaluations? Why are we producing beautiful blueprints that never get translated down to the lower levels? And when are we going to sort of separate the partisan politics from the serious need to address educational issues? So the thing is, we want to be global level. We want to be global players in education. We want to be a globally recognized country. Yet we don't have a global response towards academic freedom, autonomy, the purpose of higher education, and student debt and fees. So maybe I will just end here by saying that, if you find ourselves in a hole, I think the first thing we need to do is to stop digging. We are in a hole as far as higher education is concerned. We need to seriously stop digging. We need to separate partisan politics from the serious politics of getting our educational priorities right. So I'll stop there. And thank you for your attention. And I will pass you now to Dr. Ahmad Ghazali, who will talk about his perspective on system issues in higher education. Over to you, Ghazali.
Good morning. In this session, I'll be discussing the impact of politics on our higher education system. And this is a subject which is very close to my heart, and I believe it is also a subject which are very close, which is very close to most of us here. Now, the subject is chosen because I believe it is the most fundamental issue that we need to tackle before we can move on and smoothly deal with other issues. We have heard the symptoms of this sickness in the previous session, so I would not dwell on that anymore. Firstly, I would like to throw in a caveat, lest I will be accused of starting everybody in the system with the same brush. You know, there are a lot of good academics here, and I think majority of them, majority of us here belongs to that category. But I would like to refer to a certain select group of academics who have been working very hard to use the system to achieve their own personal agenda. I will now share my video, my PowerPoint, which I believe is the least developed of all the PowerPoints presented. Now, my presentation here is based on my observation and experience of working at 2 public universities, both as a teacher as well as an academic administrator. So others may have different sets of experience and therefore may have drawn different forms of perception. But I believe that the diversity of perception is good in so far as dealing with this kind of issue. Now, the first point that I would like to discuss is the university as a community of scholars. Indeed, it has also been discussed earlier in the first two, in the second session. Now, my postulation in this presentation is that our higher education system has been politicized, and as a result, we have ended up having universities that are not functioning in the manner they should be. They are inefficient and ineffective in terms of their achievement and economically wasteful. I will say again, economically wasteful. Now, institutionally, universities are communities of scholars, organized in lectural manner, where decisions made are based on consensus, academic freedom, and autonomy are celebrated, and academic excellence and meritocracy are pursued. Is it happening in our universities now? Well, you can ask that question. Now, and this is the factor that sets universities, that sets our universities apart from the school system. Universities are not just an additional tier in our education system hierarchy. Now, the infusion of politics into the system has created a higher education system that is mired in mediocrity. I say again, mediocrity, but craftily disguised by a facade of scholarship and false excellence. I'm sorry, I sound a bit agitated and angry, but that's the truth that I would like to point out here. I do not want to dwell on what the political agenda is, as 90% of the audience here are aware of what it is. It is an agenda that is heavily laced with perverse race and religious elements, designed to keep the ruling regime in power at the expense of the country's future. Now, with a higher education agenda driven by political expedience as opposed to the properly considered real educational needs, we have more public universities than we can effectively handle, especially in terms of the maintenance of quality. Y.B. Mazdi, when he was the minister, I think he made an attempt to amalgamate or combine all these universities together. But I think this plan now has been consigned to the bin by the current government. Now, the next point that I would like to talk is on the higher education system that is driven by quality. So what do we have? Firstly, we have poor quality lecturers producing poor quality students. These lecturers do not have the necessary academic academic qualification, but they lack the necessary skills, attitude, and aptitude towards education. This is very important. Attitude and aptitude towards education. I think it has been discussed earlier on. Now, one of the most glaring shortcomings are their poor command of the English language. I'm being very blunt about this. These severely limit their ability to comprehend the available references in their respective subject of specialization, to teach, to express their ideas, to carry out complex academic discussions, to write quality papers in the English language. This is the reality. Now, this state of affairs created a rather toxic academic environment, crowded by incompetent lecturers with deep sense of insecurity. Now, this state of affairs also pushed them into looking at alternative means to get ahead in their profession. Playing politics is an attractive option. Indulging in academic shortcuts, which sometimes, of course, closely border academic misdemeanor, is another viable and complementary option. Now, as for the students, now the preponderance of universities and lack admission standards led to the increase in the number of students being admitted at the expense of the quality. So I'm not surprised when YB Mali said that the number of Malay students, Malay graduates who are employed far outnumbers those Chinese students who graduate or non-graduate. So this is one of the reasons. Now, Malay students are given an additional advantage in that they are provided with a special backdoor. This is to use the term by Dr. Mahathir, a backdoor route, which are not available to students of other races. And I still remember a short speech given by Lee Kuan Yew. Said, in order to achieve excellence, we should provide equal opportunities for everybody, but not equal outcome. So, but this is happening in Malaysia. Now, the situation is further compounded by the existence of the notion that going to a university and get a degree is a necessity, especially if you are eyeing for a government job. Some of the students admitted that they are in the universities as a result of the presence of this presence of a pressure created by this nation. Now, with the mediocre, training the mediocre in this instance, we are in a situation that starts the motion of a vicious cycle that might eventually undermine the intellectual character of the country. Not to mention the ability of the country to progress and to compete with other countries. Well, I'm sure you have read the news a few days ago that Vietnam has overtaken us as the fourth biggest economy in ASEAN, and we are falling further behind. I can assure you that. Now, so this is the end product of a high education system where we have incompetent teachers teaching students who lack motivation and do not fully appreciate and value of the educational opportunity presented to them. Now, the next slide is on leadership at university governing level. Yeah. Now, at university governing level, leadership positions are reserved to those who have excellent track records in their display of loyalty to the ruling regime. Not excellent track record in their academic achievement. Vice chancellors and deputy vice chancellors are selected among those who have these qualities. Similar quality applied perhaps to a lesser extent, a lesser degree to the selection of deans and other leadership positions in the university. So these so-called specially selected leaders serve as the guardian and the implementer of the ministry's policy, read political agenda. Of significance is the post of Deputy Vice Chancellor Student Affairs. This post deserves special mention. He or she would play the role of de facto political commissar of the university, whose task is to indoctrinate the students and to ensure that they would toe the regime political line. Now, next one is on the issue of policy direction at ministerial level. Now, at the ministerial level, where political agenda are set and higher education policies are formulated, the obsession with ranking, we have discussed this earlier, further bureaucratization of the system that is already choked with directives and KPIs and all sort of nonsense and other instructions seems to be the order of the day. All these are designed more to make the ministry look good. They are designed to make the ministry look good rather than to truly work towards achieving an excellent education system for the country. Well, we have a lot of slogans being churned out by the ministry. I think YB Mazali is the only minister who missed this game. Things like soaring upward, when in reality we are actually plunging downward. You know, so this is happening. This is their obsession. And then it is also interesting to note, as a matter of policy, the inclusion of Tamadun Titas, Tamadun Islam and Tamadun Asia. I think that the teaching of Islamic and Asian civilization, and then of course nationhood studies, I think they call it NEGARA, into the curriculum as compulsory subject for all undergraduate degree programs in all universities. And this has got very much to do with political indoctrination rather than real education. Now, YB Mazali, I think, has done a good job in removing this subject and replacing these two subjects with other more useful subjects. But this is a really waste of credit hours for the students. Actually, they're really waste of. I think these two subjects take up about 2 credits in every degree. Now, the teaching of these subjects actually good if they're done with the right intention and spirit. If the idea is not to promote the false sense of superiority of certain race and religion, or promoting what you call it, demi bangsa, agama, dan negara. Which bangsa, which agama? Well, you all know what they mean by that. Okay, now the next point which I would like to raise here is on the biggest sinners among all these people in the system. The academics who allow themselves to be political sinners. Okay, so this is another product of our heavily politicized higher education system. So with this, we have the presence of academic mercenaries. I wanted to use the word academic harlots, but it may be a bit harsh, but mercenary is mild enough, I guess, to describe these people. Sycophants and flatterers, whose job is to suck up to the ruling politician, to legitimize this politician's actions and decisions with their intellectual endorsement. well, I think as I mentioned this, I'm sure you can imagine all the TV shows, the TV talk shows, and the articles in the mainstream newspapers. Now, these academics would engage in activities that range from writing flattering poems, actually they are of primary school limericks, praising top political figures, making worthless declaration of support to the ruling regime, proffering so-called expert opinions which are not backed by any credible academic facts and logic, even in the areas which are not in the areas of expertise, distorting facts, and being consistently persistent in their writing.
AG, I just need to jump in here because I'm looking at the time. Could we wrap it up and then take questions? Yes, please.
Yeah. And all these are actually done without any shred of conscience inhibiting them. So it is sad to note that these academics are the ones who, by virtue of their so-called qualifications, are most likely to be appointed to key management positions, actually in the university. Now, how do we get out of this, right? Now, this breed of academics are now in control of our higher education system. They may not be the majority, but they're the active breed that dominate our higher education system. So what can we do to get out of this, of this rut, of this mess? Firstly, I think for a start, we have to acknowledge that it is difficult to repair the damage that has been progressively created for decades. Secondly, we cannot expect the damage to be repaired. Now, this is very important. We cannot expect the damage to be repaired by those who are in authority within the system, because they are the problem. Now, the only organization that exists within the university that are relatively autonomous is the academic association representing academic staff. This association, if they're not already infiltrated, could play an active role in repairing the damage. They could make their voices heard by exposing mismanagement, academic misdemeanors, and other unethical acts committed by these people who are at times under the impression that they are immune for any form of disciplinary action due to the political patronage that engages. Now, together with GRA, I'm doing a bit of advertisement here. I'm sure we can move forward with this, but it must be realized that this is going to be a long haul on an arduous and bumpy journey. As a parting request, I would like to urge all of you here, first and foremost, this is very important, get to know the law, your rights and obligations as an academic. This is very important, whether you have been well treated or those in power have been abusing their power. Second, get your academic association to be more active in pursuing this agenda. And third, as an individual, please join GRA. And fourth, if your academic association is not an affiliate member of GRA, please get them to join GRA. So together, I think with well-coordinated agenda, we can slowly work to put things back on the right track. So I guess that's about all. Thank you very much. I would like to apologize if I sound rather angry, but I tend to be irritated when talking about.
Thank you, Ghazali.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.